My name is Nadia Calloway. I'm 28 years old, and on the morning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I sat in a bridal suite in Charleston, South Carolina, holding a DNA test result in one hand and a bouquet of white peonies in the other. The flowers were beautiful, the paper was devastating, and the 200 people sitting in white chairs on the other side of that door, including the woman who had spent 28 years calling me her husband's mistake, were about to find out that every single thing she'd built her hatred on was a lie. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before I tell you what happened in that bridal suite, I need to take you back to where this story really begins. Back to a little town called Beaufort, South Carolina. Back to a kitchen table with a cracked formica top, a woman with cold eyes, and a little girl who learned before she could spell her own name that she was not wanted. Stay with me, because this story doesn't just end with revenge. It ends with the truth finally winning. My mother's name was Rosalind Halloway. She was beautiful. Everyone said so. Tall, graceful, with cheekbones that photographers would have paid money to capture. She met my father, Warren Talloway, at a church social in 1994. They were married within 8 months. By all accounts, the perfect Southern couple. Except the marriage was never perfect. Warren Calloway was a quiet man who made furniture for a living, good with his hands, terrible with his words. Rosalind was loud where he was silent, sharp where he was soft. They fit together the way a square peg fits a round hole, with force and not without damage. I was born in 1997, their second child. My older brother, Donovan, was born in 1995. He had Warren's nose, Warren's square jaw, Warren's patient brown eyes. From the moment Donovan entered the world, Rosalind knew exactly who he belonged to. Then I came along, and I looked different. My hair curled tighter, my eyes were a shade lighter, my skin sat somewhere between my mother's honey brown and something else entirely, something that made Rosalind Calloway's jaw tighten every time she looked at me. I don't know exactly when she started saying it out loud, but I know I was 5 years old the first time I heard it clearly. We were at my grandmother Vivian's house for Sunday dinner. I'd knocked over a glass of sweet tea reaching for the breadbasket, the honest, clumsy mistake of a 5-year-old. And Rosalind grabbed my arm so hard her nails left half-moon marks in my skin. She looked at her grandmother Vivian across the table and said, quietly but not quietly enough, "This is what I deal with. Warren's a fair child, not a drop of discipline in her." Grandmother Vivian went still. The table went still. I didn't fully understand the words, but I understood the way everyone looked at me after she said them, like I was something complicated, something that didn't have a clean answer, like I was a problem that had been delivered to their door. I was 5 years old. Beaufort, South Carolina is the kind of town where your grandmother's reputation walks into a room before you do. Spanish moss on every live oak, sweet tea at every table, church on Sunday, and gossip on Monday. The kind of place where what people say about you becomes more real than what you actually are. And what Rosalind Calloway said about me became the town's gospel. She never said it to strangers, never said it directly to my teachers or our neighbors. She was too smart for that. She said it in the way that Southern women of a certain generation have perfected, in sighs, in loaded silences, in the careful arrangement of which stories she told and which stories she left out. She'd tell her sister Claudette, just loudly enough for relatives to hear. "Nadia's always been difficult, you know how it is." And Claudette would nod, and the nod would travel, and by the next Sunday dinner, 3 more people had filed me under difficult without ever asking a single question. My father said nothing. That is the most important sentence in this whole story, and I want you to hear it clearly. Warren Calloway, the man whose name I carried, the man who sat at that table every Sunday, the man who watched his wife grab a 5-year-old by the arm and call her an affair child, said absolutely nothing. He'd look at his plate, he'd refill his sweet tea, he'd talk about the weather or the football game or the furniture order he was working on downtown. And the silence he chose, day after day, year after year, became its own kind of violence. Because here's what a child hears in that silence: "You're not worth defending." I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think people underestimate how much damage silence does. We talk about the cruel names and belittles, but the parent who watches and says nothing, who lets the cruelty happen right in front of them and picks up their fork and asks someone to pass the rolls, that parent teaches you something just as permanent. They teach you that your pain is not worth interrupting dinner for, that keeping the peace matters more than protecting you, that you are, at the end of the day, on your own. I learned that lesson before I was old enough to name it. I just felt it, deep in the place where children store things they can't yet explain. There were good days, I want to be honest about that too, because this isn't a story where every memory is dark. Warren would sometimes drive me to the library on Saturday mornings, just the two of us, and let me stay for 2 hours while he sat in the parking lot listening to the radio. He never came inside, never asked what books I'd chosen, but he waited. And when I climbed back into the truck with my arms full, he'd give me a small nod. It wasn't love the way I needed love, but it was something. I held on to those Saturday mornings for a long time. I held on to them even when I probably shouldn't have. Donovan, my older brother, learned his role early. Golden son, protected child, the one Rosalind introduced first at every gathering. By the time he was 12 and I was 10, he'd already absorbed the family's unspoken ranking. He wasn't cruel to me, not exactly. He just treated me the way you treat a roomer, with a careful, practiced distance. School was the only place I breathed. Mrs. Thibodeau, my fourth grade teacher, kept a shelf of books along the back wall of her classroom. I read every single one. Fiction, nonfiction, science, history, it didn't matter. What mattered was that in those pages, nobody called me an affair child. Nobody watched me with half pity and half suspicion. I was just a reader, just a girl who could disappear into a story and come out the other side feeling like something was still possible. I graduated high school with a 4.1 GPA. I won a partial scholarship to the University of South Carolina. When I told Rosalind, she was standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes. She didn't turn around. "Don't thank us. You didn't get that from this family." I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, then I went upstairs, packed a bag, and started calculating how many hours I needed to work at the coffee shop on Route 17 to cover the gap in tuition. I did the math so I didn't have to feel anything else. The University of South Carolina sat 3 hours northwest of Beaufort, and I want to tell you that 3 hours felt like 3,000 miles the first time I drove away. I shared a dorm room with a girl named Priscilla Okafor from Atlanta, pre-med, ferociously organized, with a laugh like a car engine turning over on a cold morning. We were nothing alike on paper, and completely alike in the ways that mattered. She'd grown up with a mother who called her too much. I'd grown up being called not enough. We understood each other without a map. I studied communications and business, worked 12 hours a week at a campus coffee shop, took out the smallest loans I could manage, and paid every bill myself. Those first 2 years at USC were the first time in my life I understood what it felt like to be ordinary. Not the difficult one, not the affair child, not the family footnote. Just a girl with a backpack and a meal plan and a pile of coursework due on Friday. I cannot explain to you how radical that felt, how profoundly healing it is to simply be anonymous, to walk into a classroom where nobody knows your mother's version of you, to raise your hand and answer a question and have a professor nod and say, "Good point," without any loaded history attached to those two words. I called home twice in my freshman year. The first time, Rosalind answered, asked me if I'd registered for classes, and handed the phone to Donovan before I'd finished answering. Donovan talked about his own life for 6 minutes and then said he had to go. The second time, nobody picked up. I didn't call a third time. I stopped waiting for them to become different people. That was the real turning point, not the DNA test, not the wedding speech. It was a quiet Tuesday night in my dorm room when I realized I had stopped checking my phone, hoping to see their names. The hoping had just stopped. And in the space where it used to live, I put something else. I put work. I put books. I put Priscilla's laugh and the smell of campus coffee. and the particular pride of paying a bill entirely on my own. And I met Marcus Hale in my junior year. He was studying architecture, tall, quietly funny, the kind of man who actually listened when you talked, not waiting for his turn to speak, but genuinely listening. On our third date, I told him some of what I'd grown up with. Not all of it. I couldn't say a fair child out loud yet. It still felt like a word I'd swallowed that hadn't fully dissolved. But I told him enough. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "That had nothing to do with you. You know that, right?" Nobody had ever said that to me before. Not once. Not in 21 years. I didn't cry. I just nodded very carefully, like the words were fragile and I didn't want to break them by reacting too hard. We dated for 4 years. He proposed on a Tuesday evening on the rooftop of a building his firm was designing. City lights below us, his grandmother's ring in a small velvet box, and a look on his face like he'd been waiting his whole life to ask me this particular question. I said yes before he finished the sentence. If you're still here, and I hope you are, I want you to know this story is about to shift, because what comes next is what I spent 28 years building toward without knowing it. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the truth always finds a way to the surface. Now, let's keep going. We set the wedding for June, Beaufort, South Carolina. The venue was a restored plantation house outside of town, white columns, rose gardens, a ceremony space under a cathedral of live oaks draped in Spanish moss. Marcus had grown up in Charleston. His family was warm and enormous and loud in the best possible way. His mother, Sandra Hale, hugged me the first time she met me and didn't let go for a full 10 seconds. I almost didn't know what to do with that. I sent my family an invitation because Marcus asked me to, because he believed in second chances and the possibility that the occasion of a wedding might soften something in people. He hadn't grown up in a house with Rosalind Calloway, so I understood why he still had that kind of hope. Rosalind accepted. Not with a phone call or a card, she sent a text message to my brother Donovan, who related to me. "Fine, we'll come. Someone has to represent the family." Warren said nothing, which was, as always, his most consistent communication. Donovan RSVP'd for all three of them. The first sign came 2 months before the wedding when Rosalind called, an actual phone call, which told me immediately something was wrong, because Rosalind only called when she wanted something. "You're doing a DNA ancestry test." No hello, no how are you. I went still. Marcus and I had ordered a DNA test. His idea, actually. He thought it would be interesting for the wedding, something to share with both families, a conversation piece about heritage. He'd already done his and discovered he had distant Guyanese roots he hadn't known about. We'd ordered one for me as part of the same package. "It's just an ancestry test, Rosalind," I said. I'd stopped calling her mom around age 14. She'd never asked me to start again. "Those tests aren't accurate," she said. Her voice was controlled in that way it got when something had crawled under her skin and she was trying to keep it from showing. "Okay," I said. "Cancel it." I didn't cancel it, but I started wondering why she wanted me to. 6 days before the wedding, Priscilla, who'd flown in from Atlanta to be my maid of honor, was sitting on my bed in the hotel suite while I organized table centerpieces. She was reading something on her phone, and after a long silence, she looked up. "Nadia, can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything." "Have you ever actually considered, really sat with the idea that the DNA test might come back with something your mother doesn't want you to know?" I set down a bundle of peonies. "She's always said Warren wasn't my biological father," I said slowly, "that my mother had an affair, that I was, you know the word she used." "Right, but what if it's not that?" I looked at her. "What if Warren is your father?" Priscilla said carefully. "And the lie was never about you having a different father at all. What if she just needed a reason to treat you differently, and she built the whole story around something that isn't even true?" The room got very quiet. I sat down on the bed next to her, because in 28 years of carrying that word, that label, that identity as the affair child, I had never once considered that the affair itself might be the lie. The DNA results were sitting in my email. I hadn't opened them yet. I'd been saving them for a quiet moment. I opened them right then, sitting on that bed, Priscilla's hand on my shoulder, table centerpieces scattered across the floor. I read the results. Then I read them again. Then I started to shake. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark of the bridal suite listening to Priscilla breathe on the pullout across the room and stared at the ceiling and let the information rearrange everything I thought I knew about my life. The DNA test was comprehensive. It didn't just measure ancestry percentages. Marcus and I had ordered the family connection package, the kind that cross-references submitted profiles and identifies biological relatives. Warren Calloway had submitted his profile 6 months earlier to Donovan's suggestion, the same ancestry project. The test confirmed it with 99.97% certainty. Warren Calloway was my biological father, not a stepfather, not a family friend, not the unnamed man my mother had constructed her entire narrative around for 28 years. My father, which meant there was no affair, which meant there was never an affair child, which meant Rosalind Calloway had looked at her own biological daughter, her infant, her baby, her child, and for reasons that had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with something darker, something I might never fully understand, she had chosen a lie. She had chosen to hate me with a reason she invented. I got up at 5 a.m. and sat at the small desk near the window. I watched the sun come up over the rose garden. I watched the wedding venue staff begin setting up chairs in the garden, white rows of them, 200 seats filling with the soft gold of early morning light. And I made a decision. I was not going to cancel my wedding. I was not going to hide in this room. I was going to walk down that aisle. But I was going to do it carrying the truth. And before that day was over, every person in those 200 chairs was going to know it too. Are you still with me? I need you to stay with me for this next part, because what happened in that ceremony is something I have replayed in my mind nearly every day since, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something that finally feels like freedom. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it right now. And keep watching. We're not done yet. Marcus knew. I'd texted him at 5:47 in the morning, just the screenshot of the DNA results and 3 words. I need you. He called me back in 30 seconds. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Whatever you want to do, I'm with you. Whatever you decide today, I'm standing at that altar." That's the man I married. The ceremony began at 11. The venue was breathtaking. Live oaks on both sides of the aisle, Spanish moss catching the June breeze like soft curtains, white rose arrangements at the end of every row. Marcus's family filled the left side, warm and buzzing with the controlled joy of people who genuinely loved him. The right side held our friends, colleagues from my communications job in Charleston, and near the back, third row from the end, my family. Rosalind Calloway sat in a pale blue dress, with her hands folded in her lap, expression arranged into the careful neutrality of a woman attending a function she considered beneath her investment. Warren sat beside her, stiff in a gray suit, looking at nothing in particular. Donovan was on her other side, phone in his breast pocket, waiting for it to be over. I watched them from behind the floral arch at the entrance to the garden as the processional music began. Priscilla squeezed my hand. "You sure?" she said. "More sure than I've ever been about anything," I said. She walked down first. Then the music shifted, and I walked. I walked slowly, the way you walk when you want to feel every single second of something. I carried white peonies, my grandmother Vivian's favorite flower, the grandmother who'd gone still at that dinner table when I was 5, and not said enough, not done enough, but had loved me in her quiet, imperfect way until she passed when I was 17. I carried those flowers for her. Marcus was at the altar with his eyes bright and his jaw tight in the way it gets when he's trying not to cry. I focused on his face. I walked the whole length of that aisle, focusing only on his face. The officiant, our friend, Reverend Amos Bright, who had married 3 other couples in our circle, welcomed everyone. He spoke beautifully about love, about commitment, about the choice 2 people make to build something real together. Then he got to the point in the ceremony we had added. Marcus and I had planned something called a heritage moment, a brief segment where we shared something meaningful about our families and our roots. Marcus had prepared something about his Guyanese ancestry. I had prepared something too, just not what I'd originally planned. Reverend Bright nodded to me. I turned to face the audience. 200 people. Sunlight through the oak leaves, the smell of roses and cut grass, and the faint salt of the nearby marsh. I reached into my small bridal bouquet holder, where Priscilla had tucked a folded paper for me that morning. I want to share something about identity, I said. My voice was steady. I want you to know how surprised I was that my voice was steady. Because this wedding isn't just about Marcus and me beginning something. For me, it's also about something ending. A story I was told about myself that wasn't true. The garden was silent. A bird called from somewhere in the oaks. For 28 years, I was told I was not fully part of my family, that I was the product of an affair, that the reason I was treated differently, the reason I was never quite included, never quite enough, was because of who my father was or wasn't. I didn't look at the third row. Not yet. I received my DNA results this morning, and now I looked. Rosalind Calloway's face changed in a way I had never seen it change before. A color that had nothing to do with sunlight moved across it. Her hands, folded in her lap, tightened against each other. Warren Calloway is my biological father. He always was. There was no affair. There was never an affair child. The garden erupted. Not loudly, not in chaos, but in the collective sound of 200 people processing something simultaneously. A gasp from Marcus's aunt in the second row, a strangled sound from somewhere near Donovan. The whisper network igniting instantly the way it does at any gathering where truth arrives unannounced. Warren Calloway put his face in his hands. Rosalind sat perfectly still. The color had drained entirely from her face, and what was left was something I can only describe as exposure. The look of a woman whose architecture had just collapsed in real time, in public, in a garden full of people who now knew everything. I'm sharing this to cause pain, I continued, voice still steady, still even. I'm sharing it because I spent 28 years believing something false about myself, and the truth is, I deserved to know who I was. Every child does. I refolded the paper. I looked at Marcus. He was looking back at me with an expression I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. I'm ready, I said to Reverend Bright. Let's get married. Marcus and I were pronounced married under those live oaks at 11:42 in the morning. The applause was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. His mother, Sandra, was on her feet before Reverend Bright finished his sentence. His aunts, his cousins, our friends, all of them standing, and the sound of it rolled over me like something warm and enormous. I held Marcus's face in my hands for our first kiss as his wife, and when I opened my eyes, I looked out at 200 standing people and at 3 seated ones in the third row. Warren still had his face in his hands. Donovan was sitting rigidly, staring at the ground. Rosalind had not moved. She was sitting in that pale blue dress in a garden full of standing, cheering people, and she was the only one in her row who had not risen. She was the only one in the entire garden still sitting. I noticed that. I noticed it the way you notice something you've been waiting your whole life to see. Not with cruelty, not with celebration, just with the quiet, solid satisfaction of reality arriving exactly when it should. The reception was held in the restored ballroom of the venue. String lights, round tables, the smell of shrimp and grits, and something sweet baking somewhere in the back kitchen. Marcus's family surrounded us immediately. His mother wouldn't release my hand for the first 10 minutes, just held it like she was anchoring me to something good. Priscilla appeared with 2 glasses of champagne, and a look on her face like a woman who has just watched something historic happen. "You did it," she said. "We did it," I said. "No, Nadia, you did it." I drank the champagne. And then, because I'd known it was coming, I turned toward the doorway. Rosalind had found me. She was moving through the reception with that same expression still on her face, controlled, brittle, the expression of a woman who had managed her image for decades and was now confronting the specific horror of having it publicly corrected. She stopped 2 feet from me. "That was inappropriate," she said. Her voice was low. She was aware of people watching. "That was our family business. You had no right." I looked at her. I had rehearsed nothing for this moment. I found I didn't need to. "I was called an affair child for 28 years, I said, quietly, evenly. In front of family, in front of neighbors, to my father, to anyone who would listen. You made it the operating system of my entire childhood. And it wasn't even true. You don't know what our marriage was like. You don't know. I know what a DNA test says. And I know what 28 years felt like." She opened her mouth. "I'm not asking for an explanation, Rosalind. I'm not asking for an apology, either. Not today. Today is my wedding day, and I'd like to enjoy it." I stepped around her, and I didn't look back. I know some of you right now are feeling something in your chest that doesn't have a clean name. Maybe it's recognition. Maybe it's something you've carried from your own table, your own kitchen, your own mother's voice. If this story is touching something real in you, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear that the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Keep watching, because what came next matters just as much. I had my honeymoon in Portugal, 10 days in Lisbon and the Algarve coast with my husband, eating fresh seafood and sleeping past 8 a.m. for the first time in my adult life. I left my phone mostly in the hotel safe. When I came back, I had 31 unread messages. Warren Calloway had sent 7. They were not the aggressive demands I'd braced for. They were halting, fractured. The messages of a man trying to reassemble words he'd swallowed for 3 decades. I should have said something. I should have stopped her. "I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know that I knew the truth. I always knew." I sat with that for a long time. That was, in some ways, the most painful part of everything, because Rosalind inventing a lie was monstrous, yes, but Warren knowing the truth and choosing silence, that was its own separate wound. His presence at that table every Sunday, his hands on the furniture he built, his refusal to choose a side, to choose me, even once. He'd known I was his daughter. He'd let her call me something I wasn't. I didn't reply to his messages. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I was still deciding what I owed a man who had spent 28 years deciding he owed me nothing. Donovan called once, left a voicemail. I didn't know. I really didn't know she was lying about all of it. I believed her. I shouldn't have. I don't know what to say. He was right. He didn't know what to say. Neither did I. I didn't call back. The messages from Rosalind came through her sister Claudette, because Rosalind apparently couldn't bring herself to contact me directly. Claudette, who had been at every family dinner, who had absorbed and redistributed 28 years of my mother's narrative, sent me a tentative email. "Rosalind is upset. She feels she was ambushed. She wants to know if there's a way to talk." I wrote back one sentence. "When she's ready to say what she did and why she did it, not to defend it, not to explain it, but to actually name it, I'm willing to listen." I haven't heard from Rosalind since. Beaufort, South Carolina is 3 hours from Columbia, which means I didn't see the immediate social fallout in real time. But Priscilla, whose mother still had connections in that community through a church network, kept me informed. It moved, as truth always moves in small towns, faster than any institution could track. Someone had recorded a portion of my Heritage Moment speech on their phone. Not maliciously, it seemed like the instinctive reflex of someone witnessing something extraordinary. The clip was 43 seconds long. It circulated first among the wedding guests, then beyond. Within 48 hours of my wedding, Rosalind Calloway was fielding questions at her own church. Her women's circle, the same group she'd performed sympathy for, The same women who'd received 28 years of loaded sighs and careful implications about Warren's difficult daughter had seen the clip, had done the math, and had asked questions she didn't have clean answers for. Her sister, who had always been her closest ally, called her before calling me. According to Priscilla's mother, that conversation lasted 3 hours and ended with Claudette in tears. I repeated things you told me. I repeated them to people about Nadia, things that weren't true. Rosalind's response, from what Priscilla gathered, was a masterclass in deflection. The marriage had been complicated. Warren had given her reasons to doubt. She hadn't known what was true. But the people who'd believed her for 28 years were now doing the arithmetic, and it wasn't adding up in her favor. The women's circle quietly stopped including her in the Tuesday morning coffee rotation. Her deacon's wife, a woman named Harriet, who had personally held Rosalind's hand at church events while praying for poor Warren's troubled household, had reportedly gone completely silent on the subject, which in Beaufort translates to the clearest possible condemnation. I heard all of this secondhand. I didn't track it, didn't search for it. When Priscilla reported it to me, I listened without celebration. Because here is something I've learned about truth. When it finally surfaces, it doesn't need your help spreading. It moves entirely on its own. I want to be careful here because I think it's important to say this clearly. I did not go to my wedding intending to destroy my mother's reputation. I went to my wedding intending to get married. The truth I shared in that garden was for me. It was for the 5-year-old who got grabbed by the arm at a Sunday dinner and didn't have the language to defend herself. It was for the teenager who did the mental calculation of her own worth based on how consistently she was overlooked. It was for every version of me that carried that label through hallways and classrooms and job interviews and first dates, always half wondering if maybe Rosalind was right, if maybe there was something fundamentally outside about me that I couldn't see but everyone else could. The truth I told was not a weapon aimed at her. It just happened to be the thing she'd spent 28 years most afraid of. And the difference between those two things matters enormously to me. Because I am not interested in being a person who destroys people. I am interested in being a person who tells the truth. What someone else's reputation does with the truth, that's between them and the people they misled. 3 months after my wedding, I did something I'd been thinking about since the morning I sat in that bridal suite and read those DNA results. I contacted the University of South Carolina's financial aid office. I set up a scholarship, small, a few $1,000s a year funded from my own income, from the communications consulting work I'd built over 5 years, directed specifically at first-generation college students from the Beaufort and Greater Low Country area. Students who didn't have family financial support, students who were making their way without a net. I named it the Vivian Calloway Access Scholarship, after my grandmother, the woman who'd gone still at that table when I was 5, who'd never said enough, never done enough, but who had shown up at every one of my school performances and pressed $20 in my hand every birthday and called me my girl every time she saw me until the day she died. She wasn't perfect. None of the people who love us imperfectly are. But she tried. And trying, it turns out, is something worth naming a scholarship after. The university published the announcement on their foundation page, my photo, my grandmother's name, a short paragraph about supporting students who are building futures without the foundation of family support. Priscilla shared it. Marcus's mother shared it. And then someone in Beaufort shared it. And within 24 hours, it had made its way to the same community that spent 28 years receiving Rosalind Calloway's version of her daughter. Let them read it, I thought. Let them read who I am without her narration. 6 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived at our apartment in Columbia, South Carolina. Real mail, an envelope with Warren Calloway's handwriting on the front, the handwriting of a man who makes furniture, who works with his hands, who has spent his whole life being more comfortable with wood and grain than with words. I opened it at the kitchen table while Marcus cooked dinner. Nadia, I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know I don't have the right to. I knew the truth from the beginning. I knew you were mine. I never believed what your mother said, but I also never stopped her from saying it. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself it was complicated. The truth is, I was afraid of her, and I let that fear cost you something I can never give back. You stood in that garden and told the truth to 200 people, and your voice didn't shake. I've been a grown man my whole life, and I've never done anything that brave. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just saying I'm sorry, specifically, for every dinner where I looked at my plate, for every time I heard her say that word and chose silence, for 28 years of choosing wrong. Your grandmother Vivian asked me once, maybe 2 years before she passed, she asked me, Warren, do you know what you're costing that child? I said I didn't know what she meant. I did know. I just wasn't ready to be someone who could answer it honestly. You named the scholarship after her. She'd have loved that so much. I don't expect a reply. I just needed you to have this. Dad. I read it 3 times. The third time, my hands weren't steady. Not from anger, not from grief exactly, from something more complicated. The particular ache of receiving, too late, the thing you needed most. An honest sentence from your father. The word dad at the bottom of a letter. Small and insufficient and true. I folded it carefully. I put it in a box on my bookshelf, the same box where I keep my grandmother Vivian's Sunday gloves and the small photograph of her and me at my high school graduation, her hand on my shoulder, pearls at her collar, the proudest expression I've ever seen on a human face. I haven't replied to Warren's letter. I don't know if I will. What I know is that I'm not in a hurry anymore. I'm not carrying the urgency of someone who needs something from her family to feel complete. The need that drove me through childhood and college and years of quietly overcompensating, the need to prove I was worth something, to prove I was real, to prove I existed fully, even if nobody claimed me, that need has gone quiet. Not because I got revenge, not because Rosalind Calloway's coffee circle stopped inviting her on Tuesdays, but because on a June morning in a garden full of Spanish moss and white roses, I told the truth in my own voice, and the truth was enough. It's been 4 months since the wedding. Marcus and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbia, South Carolina. We're saving to buy a house, something with a porch, maybe a little land, the kind of place where you can sit outside in the evening and hear nothing louder than the crickets. He's working on a community center design project. I'm 3 months into launching my own communications consultancy, specializing in helping nonprofits tell their stories. There's a certain poetry in that, I think, in spending your career helping organizations articulate who they actually are, after spending 28 years having someone else narrate who you were. Some mornings I sit at my desk with a cup of coffee and I look at the work in front of me, a nonprofit trying to tell its story, a community organization that doesn't know how to explain why it matters. And I think about Mrs. Thibodeau's bookshelf, about the girl who hid in stories because her real life had been assigned to someone else. And I think about how the thing that saved me, words, narrative, the power of choosing which version of a story gets told, became the work I do every single day for other people. That kind of full circle thing doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you pick up the pieces of what broke you and you build something with them instead of just sweeping them away. You become a communications consultant because you know better than almost anyone what it costs when the wrong person controls the story. Priscilla came to visit 2 weeks ago. We sat on my apartment balcony until midnight, eating takeout from a Thai place on Main Street and talking about everything and nothing. She told me her mother's church circle in Atlanta had heard about the wedding speech. Apparently, it had traveled further than I'd known. You're kind of legendary in certain Southern church lady networks, she said, and we laughed until I cried. Marcus appeared in the doorway at some point, took one look at the two of us, and went back inside to refill the wine without being asked. That's the man I married, I thought. And I felt something I want to name carefully, because I think it's important to name it correctly. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, something quieter, something that feels, after 28 years, like finally arriving somewhere I was always supposed to be. Donovan texted me last week. Short, unadorned, the communication style of a man who didn't learn to reach across distance. I want to know you, if you're open to it. No expectations. I haven't replied yet, but I've been thinking about it. I've been turning it over in my mind like you turn a stone in your hand, testing the weight, feeling for sharp edges. Donovan isn't responsible for what Rosalind built. He's responsible for what he chose inside of it: the distance, the practiced neutrality, the way he let the family's ranking become his operating system without question. Those things matter, but they're also things a person can unlearn if they're willing to do the work. I don't know yet if Donovan is willing, but I'm leaving the possibility open. Not because I owe it to him, because I choose to. That distinction between what I owe and what I choose is one I am learning to honor every single day. Rosalind has not contacted me. I don't expect her to. A woman who spent 28 years building an identity around a lie doesn't dismantle it quickly, if ever. I've made my peace with the fact that I may never receive the specific apology I deserved as a child, the one from a mother to a daughter, the honest one that names what it was and why it was wrong. Some debts never get paid. Some accounts stay permanently in the red. You either spend your life collecting or you close the account and build a new bank. I closed the account. I built a new bank. If you've listened to this entire story, and I hope you have, I want to say something directly to you. Because some of you know exactly what it feels like to grow up with a label that someone else chose for you: difficult, dramatic, too sensitive, the one who causes problems, the affair child. Words that someone put on you before you were old enough to refuse them. Words that grew into the architecture of how you moved through the world, how much space you allowed yourself to take up, how worthy of love you believed yourself to be. I want you to know something that took me 28 years and a DNA test to learn. The story they told about you was never really about you. It was about them, their fear, their insecurity, their need to make sense of something complicated by making you the explanation. You were not born a problem. You were made into one because it was convenient for someone who couldn't face the truth. That is not your fault. It was never your fault. And the truth, the actual truth of who you are, what you're capable of, how real and worthy and valid your existence is, that truth does not require anyone's permission to exist. It does not require a DNA test. It does not require a speech in a garden or a standing ovation or a scholarship named after someone who loved you. It requires only that you stop letting someone else narrate your life. The hardest thing I ever did wasn't standing at that podium. It was the years before it, the years of building myself into someone who could stand there, who had cultivated enough reality around her that no single person's lie could erase it. The scholarship applications I filled out alone, the tuition I paid myself, the career I built, sentence by sentence, proposal by proposal, the friendship with Priscilla that taught me what it feels like to be seen without an agenda, the love with Marcus that taught me what it feels like to be chosen on purpose. The standing ovation in the garden was beautiful, but the real victory happened long before that morning. It happened every time I chose to build something real instead of arguing with the lie. Let me say something practical here, because I think storytelling without some practical truth is just entertainment, and you deserve more than entertainment. If you are in the middle of what I was in the middle of, if you are still inside the family system that has labeled you, still at the table where you are invisible, still absorbing someone else's narrative about your own life, here is what I want you to hear. You do not have to blow everything up to be free. You do not have to make a speech at a wedding, or cut off everyone at once, or perform your liberation for an audience. Most real freedom happens quietly. It happens in small daily choices. The moment you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. The moment you invest 1 hour of energy into building something rather than defending yourself against someone. The moment you choose to spend your emotional resources on people who spend their emotional resources on you. That is where the real work lives, in the quiet, unglamorous daily decision to be on your own side. Truth is patient. Truth doesn't need to hurry. It just needs you to keep going until the moment arrives. And it will arrive. I promise you, it will arrive. There is one more thing I want to tell you. The night after the wedding, after the reception, after Rosalind walked out of the garden, after Marcus carried me over the threshold of our hotel suite, and we ordered room service at midnight because neither of us had eaten enough at our own reception, I found something I hadn't looked for. In the DNA results, in the extended family section, my grandmother Vivian had also submitted a profile. Years ago, apparently, as part of a genealogy project she'd started before she passed. Her profile was in the database. The test confirmed she was my biological grandmother, Warren's mother, my grandmother, my blood, the woman with the white Sunday gloves and the $20 at every birthday, and the hand on my shoulder at graduation, and the favorite flower, peonies, white peonies, that I carried down that aisle. I knew, I thought. She always knew. She knew I was her grandmother, and she loved me anyway, and she called me her girl, and she showed up at every performance, and she was there when I needed someone to be real, and she died knowing the truth even when no one around her would say it. I held that thought for a long time in the dark of the hotel room. Then I whispered something into the silence. Thank you, Grandma. I carried the right flowers. My name is Nadia Calloway. I am 28 years old. I am the daughter of Warren Calloway. I am the granddaughter of Vivian Calloway. I am the wife of Marcus Hale. I am the friend of Priscilla O'Coffer. I am the founder of the Vivian Calloway Access Scholarship. I am a woman who told the truth on her wedding day in front of 200 people and let the silence after it do exactly what silence does when it's finally allowed to be honest. I am not an affair child. I never was. And the most expensive thing I own isn't the scholarship or the consultancy or the ring on my finger. It's the knowledge that I am exactly who I am, not who someone needed me to be. My grandmother once pressed $20 in my hand and said, "This is just between us, baby girl. Spend it on something true." I think I finally did. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. I mean that. If any part of this touched something real in you, the label that wasn't yours, the silence that cost you something, the moment you finally told the truth, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're still carrying a story someone else wrote about you, let me ask you this. What would change if you stopped letting them be the narrator? Think about it. Share this if someone in your life needs to hear it. Subscribe if you believe the truth always finds a way. And I'll see you in the next one.